Mr. Keith Graves.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for being on.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
So the first time we talked, were you driving to Yellowstone or from Yellowstone?
Oh gosh, I think the first time, actually, I think the first time we talked, I was driving up to Washington,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's been very busy lately.
And so that some people might not know what this podcast or video episode is about, but it's about drugs in the workplace and your background and specialty in dealing with that. I have you on here to talk to our business owners about what to say and how to deal with it. But you're busy because of changing laws?
Yeah, I'm busy. I'm busy because everybody keeps legalizing drugs. So
it's good for business.
They're legalizing marijuana. They're allowing it for medicinal purposes, or they get even crazier and they allow only a CBD, or cannabidiol, but not THC. So it's a quarter legal, but not all the way. And they keep developing all these laws, but there's no rhyme or reason, and every state's different. And then now you have states where they're making methamphetamine and cocaine a misdemeanor, so they only get a ticket, and you don't go to jail. And so the more they decriminalize, the more drug use occurs.
Right.
And because they're legalizing so much, I am spending all my time traveling around and training people that are like your audience, where now they're stuck with the after effects and they don't know what to do.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, as you know, the people listening to this podcast are cabinet makers or architectural mill workers. They build beautiful things out of wood. And their crew, their guys, their team are just regular people. And regular people use drugs, but it's dealing with it at the shop because of the safety concerns, the attendance concerns, everything that goes around with it is what we're here to talk about today. Let me back up for everybody listening. Keith, who are you and why would you be on a cabinet maker, woodworker podcast talking about drugs? Which side of the law are you on anyway?
I am on the right side of the law. So I was a police officer for 29 years. I just retired last September, and I predominantly, my entire career was spent working drug enforcement, whether it was working undercover narcotics or it was on a street team where you're working street level, like street dealers or users and stuff like that, all the way up to organized crime, multi-state, international drug dealing stuff.
Wow.
And I worked in the San Francisco Bay Area, which, as you can imagine, there's
a lot of discretionary
imaginable.
Yeah. A lot of extra cash.
Yeah. So there was definitely a lot of business. So it kept me pretty busy. And part of that, I went to a course when I was a young man. I went to a course called the Drug Recognition Expert School. And the Drug Recognition Expert School is basically teaches you how to identify people that are high, and then how to document that and present it in a court case. And so I've spun that around to train businesses. So I have a degree in business management. So I use that now to give that same knowledge that we use to businesses, so that way they can detect drug abuse in the workplace and basically keep drugs out of their business.
That's perfect. You are the perfect guest right now, because that's the feedback that I get from, people listening to this are business owners of these shops. And the shops, you have to love the people that had the guts to build these cabinet making shops, because they usually started out of their garage or they bought it from their dad or uncle and built it to something really significant. And they're doing it with a team that they've built that builds good product. But we get challenged, especially when the laws change. When marijuana is legal, I could smoke at lunch, or I could smoke on Sunday. I only work for you Monday to Friday. And that's where we're having conflicts. That's where my listeners are having conflicts. And they've asked me, get us some info on this, right?
So really, you should start off in the beginning and say why you don't want your employees using marijuana. And like a really good study, it goes back to 1991. And, back in 1991, THC levels, which THC is it's the chemical in marijuana that gets you high, that has, psychoactive effects, right? Yeah. So THC levels in 91 were like right around 2%. Well, now we can go to a dispensary in San Francisco, British Columbia, wherever. Yeah. And, that dispensary, the quality, the THC level is 25%. I've seen some that's 30%. So
Really?
it's increased drastically over the years. And not only that, like, look, when I first started as a cop, people smoked a joint, which was a quarter gram. Now everybody smokes a blunt, which is a gram. And that's like basically a cigar paper rolled with marijuana, right?
Okay.
And so they've increased the amount that they smoke, and so it's been supersized. And then the THC levels have been supersized. So even in one sitting, they're smoking something more powerful and a lot more, in it.
Yeah.
And so this study in 1991, they looked at pilots and they had them smoke a social dose of marijuana. And they said a social dose was like a moderate level, and they put the grams in there, but you get the idea, right?
Yeah.
So they smoked this social dose of marijuana and then had them do piloting tasks at 45 minutes, an hour, 4 hours, 8 hours, 24, and 48. And they were not able to function and do piloting tasks at 24 hours after smoking marijuana.
Wow.
So, and out of the people that were evaluated, only one person could feel the effects of the marijuana. So the others thought they were fine. So I know people look at it and go like, well, that's a pilot, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's not just a pilot. It's all the same. It's multitasking, right? So now you got a guy operating a saw, right? Could a saw be as dangerous as piloting a plane? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I get hired by workers' compensation companies where somebody gets hurt in the workplace, and I've had a couple of industrial saw type accidents where they're high.
Oh, gee.
And then wreck themselves on that, and now and they test, when they test you for drugs in the hospital, they test positive. And so now workers' comp says, hey, we're not going to cover it. And so I get hired to come in to say whether the drugs would have affected that accident or not.
Now, Keith, who do they say we're not going to cover it to? The employer or the employee?
The employee.
Employee.
Yeah. So they're not going to cover the employee's
time off,
medical for that. Right. Yeah. But you can see, I bring that up to show you how different the landscape has changed. You have a lot more powerful drugs. People are using more and more, and the employers are now stuck with trying to prove their cases basically about why you shouldn't be using drugs in the workplace.
And feeling like a dad or an old teacher at a high school telling people that, they hear in the media, it's legal. The government's saying it's legal. The police won't enforce it. All things considered. The police aren't enforcing it. It's just a slap on the wrist. I come to work and you're going to tell me I can't run the machine if I've had a joint?
Yeah. So,
or a blunt, I guess. See how old I am?
It depends on where you live, right? Because I know you got a worldwide audience, right? And it really depends on where you live. When you look at like the United States, every state is individual about how they handle it. Some have provided protections for medical marijuana users. There's not many, but courts have usually found in favor of the employer. So how you do that is like, look, we know that we don't want them using marijuana because it's going to affect their job. We know that, right? It's just like you don't want an alcoholic working for you, right? It's going to affect the job. When you look at the courts and the courts say how, like when they favor in the favor of the employer, it comes down to, did the employer have a policy that said no drug use and no marijuana use off duty? Did the employer enforce the policy? Did they spread it across the spectrum? Like they didn't, like, I like this guy, so I'm not going to enforce the policy on him, but this guy, I'm going to force the policy on this guy over here. Look, you have to be the same for everybody. So if you have a policy that says no drug use, basically a drug-free workplace policy, which they have those policies online for free. Right. The government puts that stuff out there. And so literally it's just a cut and paste. So you put up your drug-free workplace testing policy. Yeah. You do drug testing, right? So you do, you have a drug testing policy, and then you enforce that policy. And then what you have to think about too is, what if somebody comes forward and says, I have a drug problem, and they try to preempt everything? Do you have a plan in place to deal with that? right?
That's an interesting point, because I only know hearsay on that. What do I do as an employer? Somebody comes to me and says, I have a drug problem. Now you've got to take care of me.
So, and and that's the thing, you got to think about it ahead of time. And then how you do that is you create a policy. That policy will dictate what happens, right? And so it depends on the employer. What do they want to do? Certainly if somebody comes forward and then says, hey, I got a drug problem and I want to take care of it, I certainly wouldn't kick that person to the curb. It's not good business. It's not good for your employee. It's not good for you.
Right.
I've seen some employers be really risky. I got a friend who's got a business that does millions a year doing landscape construction.
Right.
And one of his guys came forward and said, yeah, I've got a drug problem. I need to take care of it. He actually paid for the drug rehab for that guy.
Is that a risky thing?
I don't know. I mean, I know when he told me about it, I was kind of like, oh man, that's risky, because if he fails, you've spent a lot of money, because drug rehab's expensive. So if you spend all that money to send that guy there, what's going to happen? Are you going to get your return? Now, it turned out that the guy is now drug free and he loves that company and dedicates his life to that company because they helped him. Right.
Right.
So it worked out in their favor. But the thing with your listeners, you got to have a plan, and you have to think about what's going to happen when that occurs. And there's also, like, just like you have work comp insurance, there are some employers that have an EAP, an employee assistance program, and it's like an insurance policy for just something like that. So I know in the government that I worked for, they had an EAP program that if you came forward and said have an alcohol problem, then the EAP program, just like work comp, would pay for that rehab one time.
And really? He was one.
If you didn't pass that, then hey, you're fired, right? Wow. But the best way to preempt all of this is to understand, I don't want marijuana in my workplace. I don't want people to use marijuana off duty and then come to work.
Right.
So you need to set up a policy that specifically says that's what you don't want, and this is what's going to happen if you do that, right? And if you violate that policy. I do like drug testing. Drug testing, when you look at how much you spend for drug testing and you look at the returns, when you look at the statistics, employees that are drug tested will tend to not do drugs because they like their job and don't want to lose it, right? Yeah. Some people, it's a peer pressure thing. They feel they're in this societal group where drugs are acceptable, and now they have an out. It's just like that kid in 5th grade. It's like DARE. It's like something happens, like, well, I can't because my parents won't let me, or what have you.
I use that all the time. Like, sorry guys, I can't have a drink. I'm on penicillin.
Oh yeah, right.
So there you go. I can't. In different groups, you have to have a better, stronger reason why you're not going to have a drink.
Oh, my favorite thing, when I was buying drugs undercover, they would always want you to do drugs with them, right?
Oh yeah. So
right. So I'm not going to do that. And so every time I would go, bro, I'm on parole. I'm getting drug tested tomorrow. This is for after. And they're like, oh, I get it. Okay. And then you're out of it. Right. I didn't have to succumb to peer pressure. Right. And it worked every time. It wasn't just like once or twice. I mean, it's worked 100 times over.
What you forgot to say is that the parole people are right next door to your office.
Right.
You don't say that during the drug buy. Yeah.
So, the other big thing too is like drug recognition, like to get training in how to identify people that are abusing drugs.
So how would an owner easily do that? I mean, if you walk into the room and everybody's eating Doritos, that's one maybe hint. You walk into the lunchroom, but can you give us what's your top list for identifying potential? I think we have to be careful about accusing, but what should I be watching for as an owner to think?
Yeah.
Something to dig on.
So the best thing you can do is get a baseline on your employees, right? You know how your employees act every day. You deal with them every single day. Right. You know what their mannerisms are. You know how they're going to laugh when you say a funny joke, right? But all of a sudden one day it's different. Like things are just slightly different. Now start paying attention, right? And I'll give you an example. When I was a young cop, I was not trained in drug recognition. And I would contact people and I'm like, man, this guy's just crazy, or he's having an off day, or he's just weird. And then I got trained in how to recognize drug influence. And then I noticed, my God, everybody's high. Like all the people I thought were crazy, they were just high on drugs. And the things that I looked for is an example, marijuana is going to cause like reddening of the conjunctiva. So like basically it's the lining from like that goes over the eyeball, from the side of your eye. And you can see there's little veins in there and they're all become engorged with blood, right? So like the bloodshot eyes basically, right?
Is that the same with edibles as it is with smoking?
Yes. Yes. Okay. And so here's the thing is people are going to make an excuse. They're going to say, oh, well, that's my allergies. Or, I was crying earlier. They're going to come up with something, right?
Yeah.
But then you look at their pupils, and their pupils might be dilated, right? So dilated means they're larger. And so as more light is produced into your eye, your pupil's going to shrink. As it gets darker, your pupil gets larger. Well, if you look at this guy in room light and his pupils are larger than they should be, that's a clue, right? Okay. Another one, like droopy eyelids. The biggest one is the odor of marijuana,
But apparently some of the stuff doesn't smell anymore.
That's true. So there are products out there. They got a THC patch, that you can put on your arm. A lot of the stuff that you vape doesn't have an odor because what you smell in marijuana is called terpenes. Uh-huh. And that's what gives marijuana its odor and its flavor. Well, when you get into this high potency THC products, the terpenes are out. They've been bred out. You pretty much just have THC left now.
Wow.
So if you don't smell it, they're taking like as an example, it would be like going from a light beer to dozens of shots of vodka. That would be.
Oh, so it's even worse. If you don't smell it, but they still have the other eye symptoms or
more than likely they're taking a high THC product where the terpenes were taken out of it. So, I mean, most certainly, it'll be obvious to you because that employee's behavior has changed, right? But just like our kids, right? Like I watched a million parents when I'm like, hey, your kid's abusing drugs, and they would look at me shocked, like, my son doesn't do drugs. I'm like, oh man, come here and take a look. And then when we start discussing it, they realize this has been going on for a year. I've just made excuses for it, right? So now let's look at your employee. I see employers make excuses for employees all the time. Like, oh,
because he's a good guy, he's got a family, we can't lose him. He's the best on the CNC.
Oh, I can tell you. So I was a supervisor when I left police work, and the hardest thing for me was I had a fellow coworker that I thought had a problem.
Yeah,
and I confronted him, and it was the most difficult thing I've ever done. And it turns out I was right, but it all worked out. It helped him. It helped the agency. It helped me. But that was the hardest thing I've ever done. Right. How do the hardest thing I ever had, another hard thing I had to do was, like my kids they're all grown up now. They grew up drug-free. And they grew up drug-free because I hounded into them constantly. This is not acceptable. And this is the punishment. Well, the punishment for us was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be so pissed off. I like, you might get hurt, and like, that was the punishment.
Hey, listen, I saw your background. You're a sniper. To be a sniper, all sorts of stuff that gets you to be a sniper that none of us want to know about.
Yeah. Right. So it's like, it's like that with your employees. They're just, you don't want to say your employees are your kids, but it's kind of along the same lines, For them, you have to tell them, this is not acceptable. I don't want you doing this.
Did you ever hear the Joe Rogan line? Cops and judges are parents for people who had bad parents.
Yes. Oh my God, that's great. I got to go look that up now. Yeah. That's my new line.
Well, make sure it's Joe Rogan. I'll probably get a note from a listener who knows where it was definitely a comedian, and it certainly wasn't me.
So it's so true though.
We've got all these problems, and this is exactly at the tool, a toolbox talk is what it's called different things in different companies, but just say Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning, the owner or the lead hand or the supervisor goes to the floor and has this big safety meeting and project status meeting. That's typically where we're going to talk about these things. What do I say as a company to let my team know, we know there's drugs out there. We know the laws are changing next Tuesday, or they changed last Wednesday, but here's our policy. What can you give us a script that you think would be effective for us to say? And then on the policy and procedure side, I'm actually building something for our industry anyways, policies and procedures for woodworking. So I'll go back and make sure this is in there. But what do I say if I'm the owner of this company?
Look, you got to go in strong. I mean, you don't have to go in heavy-handed and be like a Napoleon, but you have to go in and be strong, and you have to tell them, look, I know that marijuana is everywhere. I don't want that in my company. I don't want you guys using marijuana off duty, because we know that it will affect you. Even if you used yesterday, we know it'll affect you today at work. We operate heavy machinery that can hurt people, and not just hurt you, but you could hurt somebody else. You could damage product that could cost the company thousands of dollars. And for that reason, we don't want you smoking marijuana off duty or using at work. And then you have to let them know that this is a drug-free workplace, right? And then ask them, leave it open and listen to what they have to say, right? Listen to what they have to say. You'll have a lot of people that will defend you. Not everybody's going to come after you. You're going to have a lot of people that are going to defend you because they're tired of it too.
Yeah.
Right? And what I found too is there's a lot of ex-addicts that are in the workplace that are adamant that they don't want to work with people that do drugs because they know the damage. And I've seen a lot of those people come forward in support what you're doing. And it's funny, like on my Facebook page, I post a lot of stuff about marijuana. On my work Facebook page, I'll post stuff about marijuana, about the harms. Like I just did one on that study we talked about in the beginning of the podcast. And I'll have somebody attack me and say like, oh, they should just legalize it and stop, like whatever. And then you'll see addicts that will come on and say, you're an idiot. You just need to stop. Like you don't know what it's really like and the damage that it causes. And the other thing as an employer, which you have to realize too, is you can become addicted to marijuana. Right. So, that is an issue. And there's a belief that it's not addictive. Right. And that's just so not true. Here's the other issue. So a lot of people will be like, well, with drug testing, they're like, oh, well, that could have, I used it once 30 days ago and it shows up. Okay. That's not true. That's like the biggest myth that's out there. If you do test positive from something 30 days ago, that only happens in chronic users, people that are using every day. Do you want that guy working for you? Right?
Oh, you mean he used every day, but he stopped for 30 days and it still shows up?
Yep. So if he was using every day for like months and then stopped and then 30 days later they did a test, he'll test positive. But if you're just like an occasional smoker, that's not the way it works. Right.
So it stays in the system for, maybe we shouldn't answer this question here on the, let's skip over it. The other thing that occurs to me is, I have friends who use marijuana now, business owners, like serious entrepreneurs. And I imagine some of the listeners here who are business owners of their own shop might do drugs when they're at home with their buddy.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so I suppose a little bit of this is feeling hypocritical when I just smoked a joint on Sunday on the boat with my buddies. And now Monday I come in and I have this meeting, but lives really are at risk.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So, we're not trying to say it's reefer madness, right? We know, it's not that. People like comparing it to alcohol or other drugs. And like, look, you can't compare any drug to another. They're all bad in their own way. Right. And I know that there's listeners that are listening right now that probably smoke at home, but they probably smoke at work too. And the thing is that it's setting a bad example. Your employees know that. Your employees know that you're doing that. And if you're doing that, what are they going to do? It's funny when I ask people how they got addicted to drugs, I always interview people that I arrest for drugs. And I would always ask them the same question, which was, how did you start? And they'd just be like, well, I started with marijuana or whatever. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Who gave you your first drugs? It is always, not always, but like a majority of the time, 90% of the time, mom, dad, brother, sister, boyfriend, girlfriend, almost every time. Right. Wow. And it goes to like, again, we go back to you're a boss, you're using, your employees will know that, just like your kids know that you're doing that, and you're setting the wrong example. You're telling people that's okay.
as you know, this is called Cabinet Maker Profit System, but I've been a business coach for 18 years and I've coached lots of different companies. One of the companies I coached was a flagging company, road flagging, stop and go, that kind of thing. So the owner had gotten a DUI, which is driving under the influence. And so he'd had his license revoked. So his team had to drive him around to things. And he was commenting to me once in a coaching session that he saw an increase in the number of his people drinking on the job. And that came up because somebody had just had her license revoked because the police found an open beer in her flagging vehicle. Oh. And he's like, I can't believe they do this. And, he went on. And so my job as the coach, it's that tough situation. I'm like, you realize you got a DUI and you run a flagging company. And that tells everybody in the flagging company, hey, the boss drinks and drives. Why can't I?
Yep. And
he was facing the sucking sound of a toilet in his company if we hadn't done a number of really interesting things to stop that. But it's the same with, I'm making your point again, it's the same with booze as it is with drugs, as it is with unhealthy eating, whatever you want it to be.
Yep. And you bring up the DUI factor. I can't tell you how many guys I've arrested for DUI drugs driving a company vehicle high on marijuana. And I've had a few fatal crashes. I've taken a few fatal crashes where people are high on marijuana, driving a company vehicle, and then crash.
Oh, geez.
And now you're the business owner. That could bankrupt you. So, there's, you got to get it under control. You can't let it flourish and move on.
So let me ask you one more question, because this came to my mind as you were giving us that script. This is a drug-free workplace, and I won't accept it here. It's dangerous to you. It's dangerous to the people you work with. And then you've got that guy. We all have him on our crew. But the state just made it legal.
Right. So I'll put a Q&A up I'll make a Q&A available for you where every question that these guys have.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, it'll be on that PDF, right?
Okay.
So let's say you're in a state that legalizes it. As a boss, you have to know what protections that employee has for your state. Some states have passed laws to protect medical marijuana users or even recreational users. But some states, they don't put anything in there. And now that puts it in the favor of the employer. So even though, if you know what your state or what your country says you can and can't do,
right,
there's a lot of states that are in favor of the employer where he can raise his hand and say, oh yeah, but the state legalized it. That's right. And the state also gave me the right to tell you can't use it off duty or here if you want to continue to work for me. So if you want to continue to work for me,
boom,
then hey, you're going to stop and you're not going to do it. If you do continue to use it, well, thank you for your service to our company, but it's time for you to move on. Right?
Yeah. And I agree. You have to be that strong. Because waffling on this is not gonna cut it. On the West Coast right now, we have a massive labor problem. It's a tight labor market. It's hard to get people. And I hear from people in those hot construction markets, they don't want to push too hard and drive guys away. But you don't want a death on your hand. You don't want an accident. You don't want somebody.
Right.
The bad outweighs the good.
Yeah. So I am in the Northwest, and I do feel their pain, of trying to find guys. But I have seen people show up high to work on my house, and I've called the boss and told him, "Hey, you need to tell this guy to move on. I don't want him in my house because he's going to screw something up.
Yeah,
because he's either going to screw up a cut on something he's making for me, or I know that the workmanship product is not going to be very good, or." Look, man, we know people that use drugs, it costs a lot of money sometimes. And I'm not saying this with weed, but with a lot of the other drugs, let's say meth, coke, whatever, they can't cover it with their salary. So now they're going to steal my stuff to cover that. There's all sorts of problems that come up with that. And here's the other thing is you do have people who you're doing work for that can identify drug influence because they've been around the block based on their experiences and they pick that stuff out. Now, how does that represent your company when they see that?
Yeah. People give me grief sometimes because what do we stand for as a company? What are our values, our vision, our mission? It sounds like pink fluffy clouds with unicorns dancing through it. But you've just nailed it. What does our company stand for? And do I want my installer's truck on the news tonight flipped over having gone through a bus stop? Because my logo's on the side. I hate to go to the most horrendous thing, but do we stand for that? Is that something that we're going to accept?
Well, you say you hate to go to the most horrendous thing, but I've been at those scenes looking at the owner show up and the look on his face, and you could just look at him and see, I never thought this was going to happen ever. And you feel for the guy because, that's his business. It's his livelihood. You get it.
It's his brand, his name.
Oh yeah.
Quite often his name, Smith Millwork, Smith Installations, Smith Cabinetry.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, you got to have that. You got to start with policy. You got to know that it's wrong. You got to have a strong policy that says not to. You tell everybody it's a drug-free workplace. You tell them it's not acceptable. You don't want it. You tell them the consequences. You let people have a little bit of communication with it, and you defend your point. I'll give you that Q&A. So you have all the questions and answers. It doesn't have everything, but it's got enough. And then you can figure out what you're going to do from there.
You just said it doesn't have everything, but it has enough. I'll tell you what, in the toolbox talk, you will get one guy maybe who puts up his hand and asks that one question. But as long as I answer as the owner with confidence, that one question, the rest, it just goes away. Yes. Even the grumblers and the mumblers will walk away grumbling and mumbling, and they'll go, "Oh, I can't smoke up anymore." And, can't take edibles, and the boss said so. And they're going to go do what they do and make their own personal decisions, just like they would with alcohol or chocolate, whatever their vice is. But I like what you said here, by the way. I wrote them down as 3 points. Did the employer have a policy? And I love that. I'm actually putting together a policy and procedure manual framework for this industry. So I'm going to go back on my side and make sure that the drug portion is strong. So number one, do you have a policy? Number two, do you enforce it? And to me, that sounds like I need to be known as the owner who goes up to a guy and says, I think you're using marijuana. If I bring in drug testing, you're going to be the first on the bus. Right? So I enforce it. And then number three was, do I support it and apply it evenly? So my son can't use weed and I ignore it. Everybody has to be brushed. Everybody has to follow the same policy.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. This is big stuff.
Because you got to remember the courts, if you want the courts to find in your favor, they find in your favor based on what we just talked about. And if you don't have that, then the courts aren't going to find in your favor.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I've learned about this industry is the cabinet makers, not afraid of tough conversations.
Good.
No, these are subcontractors and contractors in their own right. Tough conversations, they have those early and often. They're not worried about it. But giving them the scripts like you've done today, that's a big, you've paid it forward, man. I think that's probably the most powerful part today is those 3 points, the policy comment, and then the drug-free workplace scripts. Those are powerful.
Good.
Right. Hey, if somebody wants to find out more about this or learn more, how do we contact you outside of this podcast?
So what you can do is if you go to gravesassociates.com, if you go to my website, I've got a bunch of different resources. I've got a blog. It's called The Briefing Room. And if you go into The Briefing Room, you'll see all sorts of stuff about drugs on there. And it's going to be everything from marijuana to fentanyl to you name it, right? But a pop-up will happen, and the pop-up it's a monthly newsletter that I put out. Well, it's supposed to be a monthly. I'm retired, so like it's a month and a half.
Ish.
So I put it out, and it's all just stuff that I wrote that's drug related. That it's all the current information. I do a lot more business stuff, so it's like half business, half cop, right? So it's kind of got a little bit of everything in there for everybody. But on my website, I also got my social media links: Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
Good.
If you, my Twitter is at Dope Cop. That's the easy one.
How do you spell it? Dope Cop?
Yeah. DOPECOP. All right. But I'm sure you'll put the links in the show notes.
Yeah, they'll all be in the show notes.
Yeah. If you go to Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, I put drug information out daily. Every day I put something out. And then I've also got resources for employers. If you go to Yeah. If you go to gravesassociates.com/CSI, just like the TV show.
Yeah.
If you go there, I'll have that marijuana fact up there or FAQ that'll have everything on there, all the questions and answers that you need for all that.
Yeah.
And then some other information about detecting drug influence, how to tell if somebody's high or not.
As I'm listening to you, I wonder if some of our listeners, the owners, are thinking they're going to get their shop foreman, their lead hands, their GMs to subscribe as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that they're educated, because you can't wear it all yourself as the owner. You've got to get that info to your key people so they can educate.
So your industry, that in general, usually tends to have a higher drug use rate than other industries. It's retail and then the trades.
Oh,
and so you really have to know a lot about drugs, because it's not just weed. I mean, it's a lot of other drugs too.
Yeah.
And weed's the biggest one. That's number one. But that's a start. Having your supervisors and your managers able to detect drug influence so they can intercede right away and stop it. And then make sure that they're knowledgeable about the current drug trends. Because here's the other thing with drug. I think that drug testing is great, but don't rely just on drug testing, because people are going to use drugs that you're not going to test for, and they know exactly which ones they are.
Oh.
And so what they'll do is, if, as an example, you tell them stop using marijuana, they might switch to something called spice, which is a synthetic cannabis. And that is 100 times more potent than THC. Oh, and then that's not detectable in most drug screens. And then, so now you've got another problem to deal with, right? So if you do in combination drug testing with drug recognition, right, then you're going to be rock solid. Then, you'll be able to, and then the other thing is the employees know that your bosses are trained, and that freaks them out. And, so they stay on the straight and narrow, knowing that the foreman's going to catch them
on it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, even just going and printing off this drug-free policy for the workplace, posting it, talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's as much, we have to do that. I didn't know about spice. I thought fentanyl was bad enough, and then carfentanil. And I'm just going from what I heard on the radio, but oh man.
There is so much out there that, it's crazy, all the different drugs that are out there right now. It's scary.
We should end this podcast on a positive, because everybody's driving like this now with their head down going, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do.
All right. You want a positive note? If you follow what we told you, you're going to have a clean business. You'll be more profitable with less sick days.
Yeah.
And you'll be rock solid. And
everybody gets to go home safe.
Absolutely.
Dads get to go home to their little girls and little boys.
Yes.
That's the big one. Dads get to go, and the moms that work in this industry, but parents get to go home to their kids, and they're, that should never be taken away. So, all right. Hey, Keith, thank you so much for this. What a great and eye-opening. I'm worried if they if they make coffee illegal, what's going to happen? I don't know the script for that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Keith. I know you're super busy and you're all over the place. You're even an expert witness that gets called in on cases. So you're a very busy guy. So thank you for sharing your info here. For those of you listening, for those of you watching, it's Keith Graves, and his last name is Graves, like where you don't want to be, Graves. But you can also get it in the show notes, and there'll be a transcript of this along with the scripts. Keith has promised us the FAQs, and there's a lot of information here. So please go to the website, download that, send your managers, your foremen, etc., to either Keith's site or ours to get that info, and get on there and run your business the way you want it to be run. Drug-free, safe. Thanks, Keith.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.